Making a response video to the Modern Mystic. I don't know if he's watching my video, so it might be no point in playing his video. I'll just paraphrase. It was kind of simple and short. There's a simple gripe, that I've heard before. I don't know if that camera's doing it, but it's close enough. If I put the light on, it's probably worse. But we'll see what happens. If I deflect it in some manner, that might help a little. Anyway, he has an overview where he is has little regard for the concept of consciousness. Basically reverting it into disks on a computer, hard drive, reading, blah blah blah, some sort of mechanical device that has input in, output out, and the fact that an element of our input in and output out goes through this mechanism of consciousness, and I think we could agree, I think he would concede that most of what our brain is doing in terms of forming our reactions doesn't achieve consciousness. This sentence is being composed by my subconscious. This whole video is essentially composed outside the realm of my sensations. So most of what my brain is doing is not consciously experienced. Only this layer of it, this piece of the output device, does it seem to have some necessity to create this space, the brain space, for doing this. So anyway, just to be clear on emergent properties, I mean, he used some bad examples like the heat of an engine or something, or some other byproduct kind of stuff, but you could say that gravity is an emergent property. When energy, photons I would argue, are consolidated into atoms, and those atoms are compressed in space, things with mass are put in association with each other, they create an atmosphere of gravity. I don't think it's a field, I don't think it's made out of nothing, I think it is made out of something, but the something is that it's basically influencing the photons around it in a large area, and those photons are in turn influencing the things in the gravitational field, changing its formation and creating a net potential that makes it move in a direction towards the center of the gravitation. So it's an emergent property in the sense that it's a phenomenon that we can connect to an origin, but we don't understand the mechanism of the connection. Same with magnetism, and maybe even to some extent electricity, but that's probably a little better understood. But anyway, these are phenomenons, things that we can see in the environment influencing other things that we can't fundamentally explain entirely. We can't, the bits are too small, and so that's the problem with this consciousness thing. It's something being created by our brains, but it's not something we can explain in detail. And I personally would argue that we don't need the details. That we can be satisfied with an Einsteinian type statement that you don't have to account for time in physics. You just have to accept its existence. You just have to say, it might be an illusion, it might be a byproduct, but it's one hell of an illusion. And apparently that's not good enough for the mystic. He is, in a sense, mocking the idea that somebody would say, I'm experiencing it, trust me. It's quite a phenomenon, trust me. So if I was in gravity and somebody was outside the gravity and they never heard of gravity, and they said, why are you moving towards the center of the planet? And I explained that, well, it's this gravity. I mean, it's pulling me, it's forcing me there. It's happening. Yeah, maybe I can't explain it any further than that and just say it's happening. Okay, there's no doubt about it. There's no doubt that our consciousness is fundamentally real, in the sense that it's happening. It is a phenomenon. To say it doesn't exist merely because we can't blueprint how the photons and electrons and bits of our brain are manufacturing this theater in our heads. He wants an ABC description, some kind of simple diagram. And I think we have enough of that. I mean, I think we can use metaphorical language to describe what's happening, that our brain has created an atmosphere, an arena, where there's the creation of a self-interest is created, some sort of mechanism of motivation and necessity, urgency even. And this would be known, I would call that a value generator, because it needed one. The brain couldn't advance any further without the development of a value generator, because it couldn't do learning without having some mechanism to reward positive outcomes and punish negative outcomes. It needed to create carrot and stick, to create a way to control the horse, that is our mechanism, in the sense of creating something that could uniquely react to the environment based on its individual experience. And there was a great deal of value, evolutionarily, you can imagine, in not always reacting the same, in not being predictable. You could fool the carnivore that way, by not doing exactly what everybody else does. And obviously there would be advantage in terms of finding shortcuts and being able to recognize that something won't work because there's missing stairs in the staircase or some other kind of thing, and so you have to have an alternative plan. And so this idea of this creating this mechanism, the existence of it can certainly be ABC understood as this is a valuable tool in a survival game, but this does make mechanisms more capable. So let's not deny that our consciousness doesn't have that function. And I just say, clearly there may be a way, this hard problem that comes up in philosophy, why the consciousness? Why not just a mechanism that does all of that without this consciousness? That's just the way nature did it. I mean, nature isn't a computer scientist. Nature isn't looking for the best or the most efficient course. It's looking for a course. It's looking for a way to get somewhere. And it doesn't always pick the straight line, quite obviously. And so it came upon this capacity to create this space where value can be introduced, where something called repulsion and attraction can be manifested as a personal interest. And that's the foundation, I would argue, of our consciousness, is that capacity. The feelings is why we are conscious. To have feelings is why we're conscious, not so much to have thoughts. And it's the motivating device, and more importantly, the directing device. It creates the opportunity for a prime directive to establish a hierarchy of necessity and an ability to balance different interests. I mean, I've used this as another example of why this is a very valuable tool, but you can imagine that it's very valuable to not react in an all or nothing manner to things like hunger, and to be able to figure out that, well, I'm hungry, but if I wait a couple of hours, there's less of a threat from predators. And so that's a better time to satisfy my hunger. So you have competing interests in terms of, you have a fear that compensates for a hunger and creates a more nuanced balance between those two interests that are calculated as a byproduct of consciousness. It's where the different programs, the different interests, actually debate each other in a way. The feeling is shown to us on the reality. As I'm living, as I'm sensing, our brain puts on the screen extra information, kind of like the Terminator movies where he's got all the digital information in front of his eyes or something. It's the same kind of effect. We're giving ourselves information and putting it on the screen so we can see it. And those are our feelings and our first impressions and those kind of things. And that's allowing us to now, reinterpret that world and then create another feeling on top of that. And either reduce or strengthen certain filters will be reduced or strengthened depending on what traits or what tendencies of our personality dominate, and certainly the external circumstance. If the threat is great, then that filter gets stronger, that kind of a thing. If we're feeling weak today, we have a bad mood, then we'll tend to resign from picking a fight or something. So anyway, I just don't see the I think he just wishes. And I think it is some sort of desire on his part for his own comfort to negate the existence of the sentient experience as something real and pretend that because it's just made of photons, it doesn't have any substance, it doesn't have any reality. And clearly it's just made out of energy. It's just made out of the way energy can be arranged around itself. I would argue that I think theoretically it must be completely a matter of relationship. So in a sense it's not material. It has to do with the relationship of things and not something. It's in the relationship, in the arrangement. And so it's not explicitly material. But again, I think it is perfectly satisfactory for conscious beings to testify to the strength of their own consciousness. It would be idiotic for me to say my consciousness doesn't exist, that I'm not a conscious brain, that I don't manifest things called feelings, that they don't have fundamentally repulsive or attractive substance. It's just a denial of the truth to say they don't exist, because you're saying that if I draw a picture of the photons manifesting this brain, that nothing in those photons is going to say it. Nothing in those photons is going to look like a feeling. Well, you're not going to ever find a look-like a feeling. It's clearly not a look-like thing. And if it's going to ever be a look-like thing, if you're ever going to have a picture of it, the only way you're going to be able to draw the picture is to draw a brain, is to draw a machine capable of creating the theater, creating the stage, creating the projector, creating the screen, let's say, and creating the projector, and in a sense creating the audience. Yes, it's, I've said it before, this is the funny part of it, is what's necessary to create a thinking machine is some sort of mechanism to tell the difference between good logic and bad logic, to reward good logic and to punish bad logic, let's say. And just by accident, nature fell on the creation of real value in the necessity of creating the function of something that could have been perhaps synthetic. We still don't have evidence that it could be synthetic, because we still haven't been able to create a synthetic intelligence with a true self-interest. one that can that can learn without having an elaborate programming pre-injected into it. You can't start from scratch, and learn by some sort of feeling device that rewards and punishes the thinking device. Not a perfect way to say it. But anyway, it really is just invidiously nasty for the mystic to, I think, argue that he can negate the existence of consciousness because thinking people can't provide him a blueprint of the creating mechanism. Again, I don't think we have a really perfect... I think we're closer than ever. I think I'm personally closer than ever to coming up with an explanation for things like gravity and magnetism, to explain those physical forces as mechanical devices that create the circumstance, that it isn't a magical field, it isn't a magical force, that it is in fact physical things that change other physical things. But the fact that we don't have that blueprint now certainly doesn't stop people from being perfectly comfortable saying gravity exists and magnetism exists. So I just think it's a huge dodge to say that because we don't have a diagram of how brains manifest the gravity of consciousness, that somehow we can negate the existence of consciousness. And I think somebody clever enough, I think somebody being fair, could understand that, yes, there'll be an explanation. There is an explanation. And that the explanation, again, isn't going to look like the end thing that we experience. Only in the sense that once you'd have to recognize that those certain patterns end up producing the certain phenomenon. But you're not going to understand it, I don't think, in some kind of... It's not going to look like consciousness. There's just no way to draw a picture that's going to look like it. The blueprint isn't going to look like the building. It can't represent it. You can only represent it in its function. It has to be working. That's another part of this thing, is that it's so dependent on an energy supply and being fed and all these little things the brain needs, and to maintain the illusion. I don't know what else to say. You could create a hologram. Theoretically, we can imagine. I think they've actually done things like this. But you could create an image that's looks three-dimensional in our real space, and certainly can have artifacts and flaws. But you wouldn't say it doesn't exist. Because it's not material and it's imitating material, you wouldn't say it doesn't exist. And because our consciousness is material, our brain is material, and it's creating something that is pretending to be something non-material, like this feeling atmosphere, that somehow that doesn't exist because it's not made, it's not as obviously made of the same stuff, or made the same way. But anyway, yeah, I just think this is a really lousy, stinking dodge to evade having to deal with the consequences of sentience by negating its existence through this, the complex thing that you don't have details of how it was made, so therefore I'm going to pretend it doesn't exist. It just looks like a huge rationalization, a huge dodge. And I don't think if the mystic was to honestly ask himself if a super intelligence was created, if there was some ultimate intelligence in the universe, that it wouldn't be able to concede the substantive and meaningful existence of consciousness as a phenomenon, whether epo anything or whether any of that, whatever you want to call it as a phenomenon. I don't think any super intelligence would deny its existence because it isn't material enough. Clearly it exists. Clearly we experience it. I think it would be idiotic to say it doesn't have substance. Insane. Illogical there. It would be illogical to draw the conclusion that it doesn't have meaning merely because it is a byproduct of material interaction and isn't itself material interaction. Something like that. Anyway, enough. Till next time and such. I mean, it's really a dismal circumstance when people are going to negate having to fix anything by claiming nothing's broken because nothing exists. Yeah, that's just... oh, fuck you.